anything you need, anything you can do.
Well, you're welcome to sit up here if you want. Ron won't be here.
Yeah, I know. Right,
Yeah.
right. Because of that, like,
Yeah.
you know, you underrun the distributions.
Yeah.
We have 1 pair of hands.
Yeah.
¿Qué otra cosa puede ser?
Well, I don't know. I'm going to go back through. I figured out a way to solve what I want, and that's
Have fun.
I'm sorry?
starting. Okay, the time has come. Everybody please shuffle in and find a place to sit. Okay. How many people in the room have never seen the note well? Never, ever. Okay. Great. Okay. Okay, a couple of housekeeping things. My co-chair is home with pneumonia. So if you see people that, wherever it is, the screen that shows people that are trying to get a word in edgewise from remote places, and I don't see it, do something, let me know that that there's somebody who wants to do that. And what screen is that on? That should be on one of them. Hi there. You're looking at me like, okay. Yesterday, I asked for a Jabberscribe and a note taker. I have gotten, Barbara, you're willing to do notes? Okay, thank you. Very much appreciate that. I'm looking for a Jabberscribe. Who's willing to be a Jabberscribe? No, maybe we don't have a Jabberscribe. Okay, so if you're a speaker and you're talking, you're supposed to stand, I'm standing on top of a red X. They usually have a box. You're supposed to stand here. That has something to do with Meet Echo. Now our agenda, we expected to have an invited talk from Renew, which is a NREN in Uganda. And that guy sent me a note yesterday saying that his thesis defense got moved to right now. So he's not going to be here. So the agenda as we stand today, we have Jen talking about her proposal for cache entries in first hop routers. And then we have some other drafts that have had some level of discussion on the list. and I'll invite the authors of those to come up. Jen, you'll have about 30 minutes, and the rest of these guys probably have around 20 or 15. So, and Jen, you're looking at me and saying you need an hour. Okay, okay, so, no, wait a minute. When I go to the meeting materials, it should give me the slides that you sent, right?
I think it's maybe I uploaded them.
Yeah, I know you uploaded them. I saw that they were there.
Scroll down, scroll down. I think it's down in the bottom of the page. Normally. Yeah.
Okay, good deal. And you get that.
Hello. Please raise your hand if you know what this talk is about. What? Okay, so we'll have quick recap then. So, no, not on the full screen. Yeah, I think we need a full screen for clicker to work probably. No.
Oh,
Okay.
I never would have gotten that meeting out of that symbol.
Okay, it doesn't work anyway.
Okay.
Oh yeah, this one. Oh.
Okay.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So quick recap. So what the problem is? The problem is when host joins the network, it sends RS, it gets back an array, and that array in one packet gives host everything the host needs to connect to internet. It now gets a global address, it gets router, IP address, and MAC address. So host starts sending a lot of traffic to different destinations. And at that point of time, router successfully route all those packets outside, but the router still does not have any neighbor cache entry for the host global address because the router doesn't have any reason to. Then return traffic starts coming back. Router caches one packet, drops the rest of the packet and starts neighbor discovery process, the resolution process for the host global address, which leads to some packets being dropped. And if host implements some kind of probing mechanism with some exponential backoff, host might actually consider the network to be unreachable. For example, if you, and I hope you are actually using V6 only network here, you might notice that, for example, Android phones, it takes 5 to 7 seconds before it will show you that Wi-Fi has connectivity, actually because of this. Because Android sends probes are not coming back until neighbor discovery completes, the next probes are sent 5 seconds later, and so on. So yeah, in ideal world, it would be nice if by the time the return traffic is coming back, router already has some information about the host global address, right? So we avoid this by design packet loss. So, and actually in V4, everything works fine because host sends ARP advertising the V4 addresses, routers put that IPv4 address in the ARP cache, and everyone is happy. So in dual stack network, nobody noticed any problem because of happy eyeballs. So as soon as you turn off V4, your customers and your managers become very unhappy. So we discussed it last time. Draft document was adopted. And as per discussion we had, I had split the draft in two because this is about operational problem, but the solution actually in the 6-month area, because apparently we need slightly tweak neighbor discovery. So the current version of the draft still describes what the problem is. and enumerates various approaches to solution. And the proposed solution is now described in the draft which I posted to 6man. And I also moved security consideration section to the 6man draft because I think security consideration talks about the proposed solution, so it should belong to that draft. So basically, and also the draft suggests that hosts advertise their addresses in unsolicited NAs, routers received unsolicited NAs, and create incomplete cache entry. I think Igor suggested that instead of learning from unsolicited NAs, routers could also learn from DUDs, just looking at all DUD packets received. It's one of the potential ways to solve the problem. However, I suspect the problem is that now routers need to receive all DUD traffic, which you not necessarily want routers to receive. And also there might be kind of race conditions there because host sends DUD packet, router receives the DUD packet. Oh, I am getting a new host, a new address. A router would start proactive neighbor resolution, but address could still be in tentative state, in which case the host would not respond to NS. So, proposed solution. Host should send NAs, unsolicited NAs, when they configure new global address. What routers should do, and I'm not sure here what to say, we can say they may or they should populate their caches upon receiving unsolicited NAs. And actually, if we keep it as may, then it's not even any changes to neighbor discovery 4861, because the current version of the RFC says unsolicited NAs should not create any new cache entries. And I read should not as actually may, if needed. Or probably it's a good idea that routers should create entries upon receiving unsolicited NAs. This is actually subject to discussion, or we can have this discussion on 6man on Thursday, where I have 15 minutes. So basically, not so many changes to the draft, just splitting it in two and discussing gleaning from duplicate address detection packets instead of unsolicited NAs. So yeah, and plus, yeah, as I said, two sections moved to 6man draft is security consideration and how we can ensure that no disruption happening in case of duplicate addresses. So it's actually it, and it would be nice to hear some comments, suggestions. What shall we do? Dave?
Hey, Dave Taylor. So I was one of the people that have not read your draft, so thank you for the quick introduction that you gave. That was useful. You mentioned that you added other options, and so I don't know what things you didn't talk about that you might include, but I think both of the ones that you presented have various disadvantages. And I was going to ask if you had a third option that you already covered, which is to do neighbor solicitation on receipt of a packet, more or less like you do an RPF check or something like that, in the hopes that by the time you might get a response to that packet you were forwarding, and you receive the first packet and you're going to forward it on in your diagram, okay? And so the issue with doing on the neighbor advertisement is you might never get packets. You're going to consume cache entries. And then you also have issues with all these that say, well, does this mean that if you are running out of cache entries, you might kick something out in order to put something in which you would then never use in the future? That's just an operational issue you should discuss. That will happen with no matter which approach you take, right?
Yeah.
That you might proactively create a neighbor cache entry that you never need for anything, right? And you may flush your cache and so on. But my main question was, do you have an option by which, and have you looked at the option by which you do neighbor discovery when receiving a packet you're going to forward?
Yeah, so it's not in the draft. I was thinking about that, but I actually would like to hear from router implementers, because now we start kind of we'll start using data plane to send some signals to control plane, and I'm not sure if it's a really good idea. So we can put it in the draft. We can discuss it. Yeah, like I'm just trying to enumerate possible approaches, and I don't think I shall decide what's the best one. I'd like to use the collective wisdom of the group.
So a quick interrupt here. Are we having the six-man discussion here?
I was actually going to ask that too, and I forgot. Thank you. This is really be a six-man discussion, but I was asking what some.
Yeah.
It's I'm a bit confused, right? Because I think we either need to move the whole draft there to 6 men, saying, okay, here is a problem. I don't even try to enumerate solutions in this draft. So do you want me to move all possible solutions section?
My
into 6-man
understanding,
draft?
and Bob, you might want to chime in on this, was that the six-man chairs wanted the protocol issues to be moved to six-man and the operational issues left in
So-
V6OPS.
Yeah, so we have a part which says, okay, here is a problem, right? So then there is a part which says there are possible approaches to solution, and I'm not sure where this belongs because, and then there is a decision, okay, out of all those things, we decided to do this, and this, which belongs to 6 men. So if you think that the whole possible list of things we might want to do belongs to 6 men, I can easily move that
Bob,
part to 6
how
men
would
as well.
you approach that?
It's just moving text between copy and paste from one document to another. So
Warren Kamari, Google. I'm just going to mention the Dave Thaler's suggestion potentially is terrifying because then if you're a transit router, for example, you have to be really careful you don't do that for every packet that you see or everything desk to you where someone scans or. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Bob Hinden, six-man co-chair. I mean, I'm not sure I care too much where the different possible ways of doing it is described. Could be either, could be both. I mean, if there's, if the working group accepts this, then we want to have a document that describes one of them. I care more about that part, if that's helpful.
Okay, and question for you, is Jen on your agenda?
Yes, she is.
Okay.
With I think
So-
enough time to actually talk about this too.
yes, I have 15 minutes and 6 men and half an hour here, and I'm done with my slides. So I don't know if we want to have a discussion about various options and which option we actually want to take to 6 men, or we want to have discussion about all options in 6 men. And let 6 men decide which one to pick up.
And I'm willing to have you discuss the problem and the different ways that it might be addressed, get operational input that might, bias that one way or another. But I really want to leave the ultimate discussion on protocol to 6 men.
So this is Dave. I agree with everything that Fred said. My question that I actually don't know the answer to is the decision of whether this is a problem that needs solving. Is that a 6-man question or is that a V6OPS question?
Whether it needs solving is probably operational.
Yeah.
Okay, then shall we ask that here? Because there is a document that's in here which is supposed to talk about the issues, but that's different from saying, and the discussion is sufficient that we actually need a solution, because if that's actually a consensus of this group, then saying that to 6 men would be important.
So I think we adopted this document in V6OPS last time. So I think the group kind of agreed that this problem we're solving. Maybe I'm
Worth
wrong.
discussing is the fact that you have a working group document is certainly proof that it's worth discussing, right? There are some things we have RFCs for that say, here's the problems, and we are choosing to not solve them. That is a possible outcome.
Oh,
And
yeah,
so
it's
that's why
actually,
I was asking the question. That way,
it wasn't the
chair.
document, like do nothing. Is it an approach? There is a section saying we can just do nothing and let packets to be dropped on the floor. That's fine. So, Warren?
Warren Kamari, like maybe it would be useful to ask the room if there's consensus that this needs solving, just so that when 6-man happens, we can be like, V6OPS obviously thinks it needs solving, just as a thought, who knows?
Well, at IETF 105, I got a pretty strong hum out of the room that the vendors or the operators wanted to see the problem solved. And maybe we should ask for a redo of that hum. Do people
there was.
feel now that they understand what the draft is about and such? Okay. So if this is a problem you feel is important to solve, please hum. If you'd rather not solve it, please hum. Okay. So the ayes win.
Okay, so I guess we can have some discussion in 6 men about possible solutions. And yeah, I'm still looking for comments on this one, assuming that solutions list might move to 6 man area, right? But problem statement is in the draft, yes. So, but it's quite short one. There is not much to say there. So.
So,
Like if I get more comments, yeah, I will post 01. Yeah, so I'm looking for way to improve the document.
well, let me invite questions. We've already had some at the mic, but do we have other people who want to chime in on this? Seeing none. Okay, thank you. And Mark, I'm about to bring you up, so I think. So now what? I have to.
And
press
while
this
Fred is
thing
doing that,
twice.
can I just say as the note taker, it really would be helpful if somebody would do the jabber thing. Because I had to come back here and start taking names, and this is a big room. Can somebody please get on
Yeah.
jabber and just jabber? Thank you.
Hello. It's the first IETF I've been to since 47, back in 2000, I think it was. This is my brief one. It's just to introduce a draft I wrote a little while back. Default IPv6 only, addressing for non-internet devices. What am I going to aim that for? Is that the right button? Oh, there we go. Okay, so recently I got a new printer at home, IPv6 capable, not enabled by default. According to the spec sheet, it supports a whole stack of stuff over IPv6, which is broadly good.
One of those directions.
Right, there we go. As you might do if you're in this room, you run an nmap against the global public IP address on it, and you see quite a lot of stuff. I won't go through it, but there you can see stuff there. There's UDP, some few oddities, which I'll talk about. Supported protocols as well, TCP, UDP are expected. There's some ones that I'm not that happy with that are enabled by default globally. The first two are sort of necessary. They're printing protocols, but they're unauthenticated, open to the internet. So people can print to my printer if they work out the IPv6 address. I have no idea why it's got a TFTP server running by default. SNMP is there. Yes, it's got a public read-write, a read-only community. Read-write is not private, but it's not much better. I have no real idea why it's got this Ventrilo thing on it. Apparently, it's this proprietary VoIP thing. Maybe there's some sort of printing capability in it. It's also got MDNS listening, which is somewhat understandable because it would just do a wildcard socket bind. But that being said, it could possibly be exploited or exhausted by unicast. I don't need a global IPv6 address on my printer. All my printing is coming from link local or ULAs. So the trouble I've got is that I've got just a single SSID, fairly simple setup, probably common for most consumers. And so therefore my printer configures one. I could, of course, as a technical person, create a new SSID and make it ULL only. But of course, then the convenient multicast DNS doesn't work. I do have an upstream network firewall, and that's probable. But devices can only assure what they can control. And if I pretend to be a non-technical user, which I think is a useful thing to do, imagine I don't know how any of this magic works. Those sorts of things are really beyond a non-technical user's capabilities. A broader thought I've had is that because devices configure IPv6 addresses regardless of what the PIOs are or DHCP, when a device is configured with a global IPv6 address and GUIs sort of imply internet connectivity, it's sort of a bit of an implication that we believe that all internet-facing software is internet-proof. And evidence is showing otherwise 20 years after SNMP exploits and so on. a bit of a stretch, but I sort of think that the end-to-end argument may apply a bit, or at least the one way I think of it is, it's sort of saying do things where the results matter the most, and do things where the best knowledge of what is and isn't required is available. Or in other words, if you want something done properly, you need to do it yourself. So my proposal and suggestion is that for devices where it's clear and obvious to a vendor that the device doesn't need internet access by default, it only configures ULAs, either via Slack or DHCP v6. And it only accepts packets from ULAs or link locals, which would reduce the attack surface by default and generally make devices a bit more internet safe by default. There would be an override for a competent system administrator, so if a printer like mine was deployed in an office or something like that, or so on. Some people, when I proposed this, they suggested, oh, you know, you should use MAD or manufacturer usage description. The goal seems somewhat similar, although the network is sort of to enforce the security policy rather than the device itself. So they talk about low-powered IoT devices and the network being configured with access control lists and so on. It's much more discreet as well, which is fair. It requires a supporting MUD server infrastructure, and it assumes a local network administrator to manage this and monitor it, etc. Well, the typical non-technical home user is not going to be capable of doing that effectively. So in comparison, this is a very simple mechanism. It's binary. It's either on the internet or not. And if it's not on the internet, whatever services it's running aren't reachable from it. Doesn't require the technical administrator. And it could also be seen as a complement to MUD and the network firewall. Another example, I've had some experience with electricity smart meters. Now, they must really be using ULAs because you don't want your electricity meter infrastructure sitting on the internet at all because of DDoS and electricity network sabotage. So this mechanism could be seen to be enforcing that requirement of safety for these sorts of devices. Another comment somebody had was about the idea of having these devices do their own firmware upgrade. Well, if that's the model of software maintenance that the manufacturer is choosing, well then yes, it's clear and obvious this device does need internet access. However, an alternative idea to that is that maybe for something that is say it's limited just to firmware upgrades, then the device actually does on-demand global addressing. So when the device does its periodic probe to see if there's a new version of firmware, it goes and acquires a ULA, a global address, does the check. If there's no software update available, it deprecates it and just continues to be available via ULA or link local, and or the same thing if there's an upgrade. So sort of that middle ground. Any thoughts or questions?
Jelinkova. I'm a bit scared because now I have a printer which I can install in the office and printer which I cannot install in the office, right?
Why can't you install it in the office?
What?
Why can't?
Well, because if the device doesn't get global address,
Yep.
I cannot use it in the routing infrastructure in the office, right?
Well, it uses a ULA. That's
so now I
routable.
need to roll out ULA in the office
Yep.
in addition to, oh, thank you very much.
Yep.
Why? So now I need
So that you don't put things on the internet.
To use a printer, I now need to roll out ULAs.
Yeah, well, all our CPU's doing that already.
No. So like
But you can switch that off. I've given you an option.
So like if you just want link local, just disable Slack on it, just disable accepting
No,
arrays.
I don't want link local. I want ULAs as well. You want link local only or link global.
So like I kind of concerned about encoding into the device its behavior. So someone needs to make a decision. Is going to make a decision for me what kind of addresses the device will be able to reach.
And I think that's the thing. That would be a technically competent person who could make that decision.
It's
whereas grandmas and whoever are not going to be capable of making that decision.
Well, I suspect that if it's a problem, that the CP vendor needs to be the technical person, not allowing incoming connections, right?
This sort of goes a bit to what I was saying about we seem to be sort of assuming that all software is internet proof, and it's not.
So like again, I do not think we need to encode into the device and in ULA semantics what kind of how to say it? Yeah, so like if device has a global has V6 connectivity, it should have V6 connectivity, and so otherwise, yeah, we really would need to have a sticker on the printer box, right? You can connect to printer this internet, or that printer could not be connected to internet, right? Because I don't think we need to change the addressing plan because we bought a special device. We already have enough problem with all these smart devices which could not do V6 properly, and this just adds additional complications. So how do I know if my smart sensor, all this Internet of Things stuff, need to connect to internet, to ULS,
Well,
or whatever?
I mean, but that's where the manufacturer, smart meter, as an example, smart meter manufacturers don't manufacture their devices to be on the internet. That's clear and obvious to them. So
obviously, if I have a infrastructure, I want to connect to those devices from my infrastructure. And again, I don't think it's a good idea to suggest that everyone who uses it needs to enable ULAs.
Okay, Fernando?
Yes. Hi. I like it, the idea that you proposed, but I had like a couple of questions. The first one is that if you're essentially, filtering the addresses that you will configure based on the prefix, my question is there any requirement that the CPE router, for example, advertises a ULA prefix?
I realize that I'm effectively suggesting that. But
Okay.
all our RFC 70 or 6204 CP or whatever later, that all requires ULAs are generated and advertised. My sister's
Okay. The requirement is there. It's okay. And another comment that I had is that somehow in your presentation you were assuming that if the device were to configure a global address and a ULA, for example, it would end up listening on both addresses. In practice, that's what happens, of course. But I think that's a sign that there's something, probably an API that's missing, in the sense that you could have a device with both global and, for example, ULA addresses. And those applications that don't really need global connectivity could just bind the ULA address. So you could configure the global address, but only bind those ports to the ULA address.
I reckon you've written a draft on this, and I must admit I've had this idea myself as well. The question are a software developer is going to do that for each and every service listing on my printer or so on and so forth. It's sort of, this is sort of where as much as discrete application level security stuff appeals to my end-to-end philosophy, I sort of think that something much more fundamental at sort of the IP layer, it's a blunt object, it's a blunt enforcement, agreed, but it becomes a binary thing. Is it on the internet or not?
But is it like everything has to be on the internet or nothing has to be on the internet? What I mean is that, for example, I could envision that an application could, for example, somehow signal to the operating system, okay, this service is supposed to be local, this service is supposed to be global, and based on that, you'd bind that port to, for example, some subset of the addresses that you have. Unfortunately, we don't have such an API.
First sentence on the slide. If it's clear and obvious to the vendor that it's going to be on the internet or not, if it's ambiguous, this wouldn't apply. But if there's certainly, device cases, I look at light bulbs, for example, the IPv6 enabled light bulbs. You might have a central controller in your house that might be on the internet, that might download the firmware that provides you remote access to your light bulbs. But the light bulb itself might not and possibly shouldn't be on the internet. So it would enforce this and say, well, even though I might be able to configure a global address, I won't, because I'm a light bulb. The light switch or the central controller would configure both. So that's sort of where that boundary I'm thinking is.
Yeah, but for example, if you have a device like you were mentioning that has automatic updates, for example,
yep.
At least during that window of time when the device is checking with some server over there whether there is an update or not, there will be a window where the device can be attacked. Okay, so that's an indication that also the application should somehow, signal to the operating system whether it's the application is supposed to be, internet reachable or not.
I'm not disagreeing. I suppose the thing to think about is that if a device has a global address for a second or two versus 24/7 that they do now, it's
I agree. Yeah.
improvement. It's not perfect. I'm not selling it as perfect, but it's just, my printer's already, like I had to do a firmware upgrade on it because there was a remote exploit. The password on Telnet was default to admin or something like this. This is 2019. The approach of trusting people to build internet-proof software is not working. I'm not saying this is a solution, but it's an incremental defense in depth. And that's sort of
fully agree on that.
I'm having. Thanks. If that's it.
Okay, thank you, Fernando. The virtual queue is Dave and Eric and Jordy. So Dave?
Dave Taylor. The only thing that you mentioned that gave me pause is the bottom line on the slide, where you're talking about only accept packets from ULAs.
Or link local, sorry, it's a bit blocked there. Sorry.
I was going to say that too, but I figured that's probably what you meant. That's what has a danger of operational issues, because the case that I'm worried about is where the printer only is following this rule, and the other device, the one that's trying to print to it, is on link and only has a GUA.
Yeah.
But it's on link, and so you could ARP neighbor discovery for it, and it was on link. Okay. And this could happen if, say, one of those is Slack only, and then the other one is DHCP6 only, or there was some timeout when you were trying to do the request or whatever. So there's operational issues. And so if you were to extend it to say, or you have reason to believe that it's on link because your RAs or whatever else says it's on link prefix, you'd have less operational problems.
Yeah, I certainly did think a bit about that scenario. I was thinking more, imagining a GUR-only device on another subnet somewhere, trying to reach this. But it seemed to me that sort of ULA has this notional, it's internal traffic, so internal devices. Yeah.
Okay, Eric Venk here. I see a major flaw somewhere in your approach. You assume that ULA or even link local are safe, can be trusted, and it's not the case. There is a printer on this old SSID here by the IETF, which can be hacked by 1,000 people. So is the printer safer because it's using ULA? Not really.
Safer than 1 billion people on the internet, I suppose.
But typically you will get a firewall. So, but whatever, and then the other point as well, ULA, you see maybe a /64 or the /48 of your ULA?
I would actually just do the whole /7.
And then the last point, right? Maybe there is an attack, IPv4 to be sure, but typically where you were downloading a malware on your PC and that was scanning inside. So basically to attack behind the NAT. So the same thing could apply on ULA basically. So for me, the added value is thin, but that's matter of taste, I guess.
Yeah, it's trying to be incrementally better than what's out of the box in a printer like this, for example. We can lobby to have 15 different software developers develop internet-proof software. If we could get that to happen, it would be wonderful. We wouldn't have any of these issues, but they just don't seem to be going away.
And last, for your information, my /48 at home is fully open, by the way.
Yeah. We'll scan for that one.
Okay, so I'm at a point where I need to cap the line. We're going to get no new people in the lines.
Jordi Palet, most of what I was going to say has been said already, but my general impression is I am not really sure it's so clear and so obvious to a vendor if a device will be in that situation or not, because sometimes it depends on where you are installing it. And as a general comment, if we are trying to do a security increase with this, I rather think it will be much better to improve the security in the sense of mandating some kind of firewall rules by default in devices or in the CPs. I think that trying to make ULAs available in every network that can have this kind of devices is a big operational complexity. And in general, I don't recommend it to my customers. I ask them to go away as much as possible of ULAs, because the reality from the operational perspective is that it adds a lot of complexity.
Hi, Andrew. Mark, thanks very much. I must say, I was listening to this and I'm kind of on the fence here. On the one hand, I see what you're trying to achieve. On the other hand, I look at this and I go, we've lived for the last 25 years with the lie that NAT is a security mechanism and there is security through obfuscation. And this to me would seem to propagate that lie, which worries me. It also concerns me that if there is an attacker and you implement something like this, all the guy is going to do is look for something with a global address on the same network, and he's going to come in that way. And I'm not sure that you really gain anything considering the operational complexity that you introduce. I do think that we could look at a better security posture on the CPEs and the edge, rather than going through this. I'd also say that I, for one, don't trust my vendors to decide what needs to be on the internet or not. If my coffee machine needs to be on the internet, that's my choice, you know. Just a thought.
So just a thought too, if you got your Apple iPhone or your Android phone plugged into the network here, you're trusting Apple and Google to be doing that already. Because I haven't found a firewall interface in my phone yet, and I'm sure no one else here has either. So this is actually sort of happening already with the controversies about centralized. We got centralized device security for a lot of our devices as it is. Look, I'm very much an advocate of host-based firewalling. Steve Bellefin's distributed firewalls paper from 1999 was a mind-blowing thing to read about 15, 20 years. No, I'm talking about host ones, not network ones. So I like to assume there's no network firewall at all, like Eric's network. This is sort of like a very coarse viewpoint on that, rather than very distinct, etc. So if we could get people to implement very discrete, very effective per service-based firewalls in their hosts, that would be a good thing. Yeah, I like the term boiling the ocean. I'm not saying that would be boiling the ocean, but it's turn up the stove a bit.
Hi, David Summers Harris, Ruckton. Kind of echoing some of what other people said, but like you said, putting on your non-technical users hat on and trying to think from their perspective. It was interesting, different examples you gave, like printer in the home or smart meters. And I think if you think of examples like smart meters, it makes sense because it's more black and white. But at the same time, you have a very technical person managing the networks and deploying the hosts there, right? Whereas if you think of a printer scenario in a consumer's home, actually it's a lot more gray, which I think someone else kind of pointed out, because usually these kinds of devices which are marketed and sold to consumers that don't know how to configure things have all these like add-on extra features like print through the cloud or
mine
whatever,
does that too,
right? So when, as a non-technical person, I want to enable this feature, and if I get delivered a device which a vendor says, well, most of our user base isn't going to need internet stuff, so we'll do ULI by default, I might go to my router and then like open up the firewall so that it can talk to the internet and then expect it to work, but then find out that I have to go read a book on how ULA works in order to get this to work the way it's supposed to, which I think you're trying to make it easier for users, but then you're going to make it harder for users that aren't technical at the same time, which is the operational complexity, which I think some people have pointed out as well.
Hi, George, I had kept the line.
You ended the line?
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks, that was easy. Maybe, look, I'll finish on one thing, and I'm not really suggesting this, but maybe Google needs to produce printers like they produce phones, and Apple do too. Take care of all our device security. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, so now, what in the world?
That's the document.
Hard. I don't know.
How many people was in Montreal looking at this presentation? Just half? Okay. Because I wanted to avoid to repeating everything, but what I am going to do is to go quickly through it. Okay, so what is this about? Oops, this is not working as full screen. No.
Well, one would kind of expect it to.
Okay, more or less. Okay, so what happens when you have carrier grade NAT in caches and content delivery networks is that they do some kind of bypassing to avoid all the traffic going through the carrier grade NAT. Okay, so we have a case which I believe it's going to happen everywhere. Where an Argentina network, Telecentro, which is one of the co-authors of the document, was saying, hey, I succeeded to implement IPv6. I want to use 464XLAT, but I have the problem that will mean most of the traffic going to the CDNs will become now IPv4 instead of staying in IPv6, because with 464XLAT, it could be converted to IPv4, right? So why that happens, if I can move this correctly, let's see.
Well,
it should work with full screen and that's it?
one would think.
Okay.
But that isn't one button. That's
Okay.
apparently pressing
Interesting.
one button twice and then doing something on the screen.
Interesting. Okay, so the thing is that in a typical 464 XLAT deployment, you have the CPE, which has dual stack devices, and then you have the one link, which is IPv6 only, and then this one link is connecting to both the IPv6 internet and to the IPv4 internet via the NAT64, okay? And you have also DNS and maybe DNS64. What happens is that if I guess you will need to go move the screen in every slide. When you have an IPv6 capable device, the traffic from the LAN network in the user will go this way. So clearly, because the CDN is dual stack, we will get dual stack and IPv6 end-to-end. Okay, so that's the perfect case. That's the ideal situation. Now, what happens if we have an IPv4 only device? And a very clear example is smart TVs or set-top boxes, is that even if the CDN is dual stack, what the set-top box is looking is for an IPv4 address. And of course, the DNS64 and the NAT64 will give him an IPv4 address. So we will be using all the way through for that flow, the NAT64, even if we have already converted that to IPv6, that's the green part of the arrow, but we will convert it again to IPv4, okay? It don't make any sense. It don't make any sense because we could probably find a way for the already converted to IPv6 traffic to keep going as IPv6 to the CDN. So this will be the idea. The idea will be to keep the already converted by the CLAT, so it's a NAT 4.6, to keep going until the CDN as IPv6 instead of converting twice in the NAT64. And of course, that means that all that traffic that go to the CDN, probably about 60, 65%, 70% of the traffic will not go through the NAT64, which is already a lot of traffic. Now, this is the situation I already mentioned for set-top boxes, smart TVs, which very few of them will go like this, like all IPv6 end-to-end. There will be, okay. there will be others which are not using IPv6, and there is still a lot of smart TVs. I checked it with several smart TV vendors, and they are not going to update them. So unless you buy a new smart TV in 2 years from now, the old ones most of the time will not get updated to support IPv6. They will go this way, okay? So they will do a translation, a stateless translation in the CLAT IPv4 to IPv6, and then again a stateful translation in the NAT64 from IPv6 to IPv4. Again, no sense because we have a dual stack CDN. So what we want to do is to conserve somehow that translation that has been done already by the CP and keep going as IPv6 until the CDN. Worked out 3 possible approaches for this. One of them is a DNS routing based solution, which means basically that the CDN should provide addresses from the well-known prefix or the network-specific prefix, depending on which one is using the ISP. So that will just work, okay? That's one approach, but it has some issues that we have described it in the document, and it seems it's not the best way to do that. In fact, when we have been talking with different CDN providers, some of them maybe will do that, but some others said, no, we are not going to do that, okay? It adds a lot of complexity to our operations, and we don't want to do that way. So we have a second approach, which is using explicit address mapping tables, okay? This is already defined. I don't remember the RFC number, but it's something that is being used already for some time ago. And the idea is that the NAT64, the CLAT and the C, they are already doing all the DNS thing. So because the C is also the proxy, we can have an internal mapping automatically created, okay? So the idea is that by looking into the traffic flow, the CPE can guess, is not for sure, but it can guess that a device is an IPv4 only device. And if it can guess that, then he can create an entry to make this magic, okay? If the guess is not done correctly, we are not breaking anything. The traffic will be converted twice, but we are not breaking anything. So that's the interesting point here. So this is an example. So we have a website that has an A record and a quad A record. There will be an entry created to link the A record with the quad A record. So automatically, when this device is trying to look for the A record, it will automatically go to the IPv6 thing, right? We have went already into several versions of this document. I think this is version number 4 because we discovered several things that may happen. For example, one of the things that was discovered is maybe there is not a single IPv6 address matching a single IPv4 one. So in that case, we are just discarding the translation. We are not trying to optimize the traffic in order to avoid that, okay? Well, this is a little bit of the explanation of all the details that we have worked out, and this is the change that we have done in the last review. So this is the important view. You already have read this draft before this version. There was a very extensive email from Eric Nigrin, and we have some private email exchange. He was saying basically that if we do this way, this is not sufficient in order to ensure that individual applications are also able to keep the existing connections. So we may be breaking the operations of the CDN. Okay, so he was suggesting basically what we did, that instead of using the explicit address mapping for just creating the DNS connection from the A record to the quad A record, we just make possible to create a stateful NAT entry among those two addresses, okay? So that means that even if the DNS change, depending on TTLs or whatever happens, the existing connections will still survive. He was mentioning the example of video that if you keep changing that, obviously the video will need to restart, recover, and so on, and you will be breaking it all the way. So that's basically the thing that we change it. I don't think, okay, we have one additional approach, which is instead of the CPE creating these explicit address mapping tables, we can do something, and we have not done too much work on that because we don't believe this is the best approach. We can do something so the ISP send to the CPEs or the CPEs query from the ISP the explicit mappings. The problem with that is how we make sure that those mappings are getting updated fast enough to accommodate to CDN changes. So that's the reason we don't believe this is a viable approach. And it has also the complexity on looking for which protocol we use for doing those signaling between the CPE with the ISP and so on. And I think that's it. Well, there is one additional detail I almost forgot. Today, you can move it a little bit high, Fred. You can move it a little bit high. So there is one additional interesting thing that we just at the moment have as a comment in the document, which is that today we don't have any solution for having IPv6 only services talking with IPv4 only devices. Now, if we go for this optimization and we create, let me go up. If we create a fake A record, no, the previous slide, but the bottom part. Yeah, that one. If we create a fake A record in an IPv6 only service, we are not breaking anything because anyway, IPv4 devices are not able to use that service. But if the CPE has this optimization, it will work, okay? So we believe we don't break anything, but instead we are providing a solution for those IPv4 only devices. And that's it.
Okay. So comments, tomatoes. Okay, I don't see anybody charging the mic. We'll go to your next presentation. Maybe.
Yep. Yep.
Go for it.
Jody, I'm not going to reiterate everything I said in Montreal about fake DNS records, but I have to ask, considering everything that was said in Montreal about fake A records, what's changed since then? Because if I remember correctly, there was quite a queue about that.
I think the queue was not for that part of the draft. It was for the other part, and I think which what Eric, the inputs from Eric, I think we have resolved it. We are waiting for inputs from other people.
But it sounds like you don't like fake A records. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, but in any case, that's an add-on to the draft. So in fact, my suggestion is probably that need to move to another draft, a different place.
Hi, Jared Mach, Akamai. I'm real quick about this. I'm wondering if we should also be consulting with the folks who are looking at shifting DNS away from the local ISPs and consulting with them about the activities around that a number of the application and or browser vendors are currently investigating, because that has a potential to significantly impact these technologies.
We have already a specific section in the document about that. And basically, our conclusion is if you are not using the DNS from the ISP, you will not take advantage of the optimization, but the optimization is not breaking it.
谢中锋 of China Telecom. In some countries, the IPTV video service is confined in a closed network, which means that the service does not have any connection with the public internet. So I think that this kind of scenario should be included in this draft. This is my...
The point is, in those cases, are those services already IPv6 enabled as well?
No.
No, then it's no.
Because a problem that it is difficult to upgrade the CPE to support IPv6, especially some CPE may be too old. So it's IPv4 only.
But that's my point. If that closed network for IPTV services is not IPv6 enabled, we don't have any impact on that. Okay?
So Jordi, let me take you back to Jared's comment. Bypassing the ISP, you basically argued that the optimization wouldn't break anything. In the same case, but in an enterprise environment, enterprises often have very specific rules about DNS and are actually pretty concerned about DOH and DOT because they bypass the corporate information security policy. And so there's been some work done in Chrome and in Firefox in order to
avoid that.
Not break that. So is it sufficient to say, well, yeah, but I didn't break anything? I think you may have messed with the information security policy.
I can check again, but my observation is that if you are not using the DNS from the ISP, the optimization will not work.
ISP in this case being the enterprise.
The enterprise, exactly. So that's why I say if the CPE is not able to do optimization because there is not a possibility to use the DNS from the ISP, you are not breaking it. You are not changing the existing situation, right? If you don't apply the optimization.
That might be a question of viewpoint.
I can double check again, but we have looked into that several times. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Failing that, then let's move on to and do me a favor. I think I may have gotten this right. So click on that. See if maybe it's working.
Yeah, much better. Let's see, much better. Okay, so I presented also this document in Montreal, and I updated it because I got comments from Eric, I think, and Mark, and someone else. I don't remember. I think I got comments from at least 2 or 3 people. This document, I started initially in 2006. At that time, not too many people was paying attention to that, but I realized it after a few years that a lot of people is using what I was trying to say in the document from 2006. And in fact, there is explicit DHCP-V6 prefix delegation option to exclude that prefix. So that was a small part of my original document from 2006, which is, okay, let's give the customer /48 and let's use the first /64 for the point-to-point link, for the one link, okay? So there is already a document that is using that, but is not described in any other place. So that document is just saying, okay, you can exclude the prefix for what? It's not explained for what, okay? So what I am trying to do in this document is to explain that and take an overall review about how we can do point-to-point links. So summary, we start the document saying that yes, RFC 6164 describes that one of the possibilities is 1 to 7, and that document, which is being misread by a lot of people, is not saying that's the only way, that's the mandatory way. That document is that must be supported by routers, okay? So there is not a very clear idea because the people read that document like, hey, I need to use 127. No, that's not what the document is saying. So I clarify that. And again, that document, of course, is not excluding other options. And in fact, I keep doing a survey among ISPs that are deploying IPv6, and about 62% of them are using /64 instead of /127. 62% is a lot. It's not just peanuts, okay? A new section in the document that somehow was suggested by Eric, and also Mark provided some inputs on that, is reviewing again the ping pong problem, okay? Because that was the main reason for the previous documents to go into that. Then we described the different prefix choices, like /64. I added some text with reference to mitigations for that. Added some text for the /127 to ensure that if that's being used, you need to make sure that both endpoints are using the 127, otherwise you still have the same ping pong problem. I added a reference to 126. I think Fred asked for that because he was surprised that people was using 126, or somebody asked for that. Additional small changes in that section. Then we changed it a little bit also this section. I was using addressing types, and it was a suggestion to say addressing scopes. Well, I seen some documents, types, scopes, but yeah, I am fine, so keep scopes. Global unicast addresses almost didn't change it, maybe some typos. In the ULS section, I added explicit reference to RFC 6752. Link local, I was using unnumbered, and yes, again, some people is using unnumbered, but it's true, it's not correct, so we changed that to link local addresses only. And then we go also to describe what are the options for the prefix pool, including what I just mentioned at the beginning, which is using the first /64 from the customer prefix, whatever is /48 or /56 or whatever. This is a picture about some of the data that I mentioned before, like the number of people that is using, the 62% of people that is using already /64 instead of /127. And that's it basically. So not major changes in the document, just updating some sections, clarifying some text, and that's it. Questions?
Okay, once again, I don't see people charging the mic. So our next presentation, thank you. Next presentation is going to be remote. Fernando's online somewhere. And Fernando, I think you actually need to click on something in order for me to, there you are. Okay, so, and I'm getting your slides, Fernando.
Perfect. Can we do, I don't know if the order in the agenda was the CP first and then the Slack renum. Can we do the problem statement first?
Sure, and I thought I did that, but you know, whatever. So where are we at? Here we go.
Session 2.
I'm sure this is intended to be easy to use. So that one. Yeah, okay.
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm on your heading slide.
Perfect. So good afternoon to you. I'm Fernando, and I will be presenting a document on the reaction of Slack to flash renumbering events. You might remember that at the Prague IETF meeting, both in Sixman and V6OPS, we had been discussing this topic. At the time, we had a single draft, that essentially had the problem statement, discussed operational mitigations, and also discussed like possible protocol improvements. Based on the feedback that we received since then, what we did is split the original document into 3 different documents. So this is the first piece of it, which essentially just contains the problem statement. So next one. So essentially, there are a number of scenarios in which you might face a flash renumbering event, which essentially means that all out of the sudden a prefix becomes invalid and a new valid prefix is introduced. Of course, that means that hosts will end up with stale network configuration information, and IPv6 connectivity will normally fail. Obviously, in cases where happy eyeballs is employed, that will mean that IPv4 will be employed instead of IPv6. Next slide. So in most of the discussion that we had on the mailing list, many people were focusing on a single scenario where essentially you have an ISP that is providing dynamic prefixes to users, and a CPE router crashes and reboots, and that's when the flash renumbering event is faced. But actually, in the document, we were covering like several examples. For example, there's a possible scenario where a switch port is moved to a different VLAN. In that case, that network will face a flash renumbering event. It could also happen that, for example, the network is partitioned. So when the RAs are sent by the routers to essentially invalidate or deprecate the prefixes, those are lost. So essentially, when the connectivity is resumed, you will face the flash renumbering event too. There are scenarios where you might be manually configuring your network and you just change network configuration, you just kill the daemon and start it again and restart it. And that would also mean a flash renumbering event. And then last but not least, there's the scenario that has been mostly discussed on the mailing list, which is the case where CPE router, for example, crashes and reboots. And since the ISP is doing dynamic prefixes, the CPE gets a different prefix, and again the flash renumbering event occurs. Just as a note, Shorty did a survey on ISPs, and he included a question on whether ISPs were doing dynamic or stable prefixes, and 37% of them were doing dynamic prefixes. Okay. Next slide. So what does this document do? Essentially, as I mentioned before, we originally had a single document that tried to do everything. Analyze the problem, also discuss possible operational mitigations, and also discuss possible protocol updates to improve the reaction of Slack to renumbering events. And based on the feedback that we received, we ended up splitting the document into 3 pieces. Now, this specific piece that we are discussing here essentially analyzes this problem, describes some operational mitigations. For example, in the specific case where that I was referring to regarding the CPE router, noting that if you were doing stable prefixes, of course, the problem would be mitigated. And also that you might operationally tweak the lifetimes that you use for the PIOs options that you advertise in the arrays. So obviously that wouldn't avoid the problem, but would limit the amount of time during which this problem persists. And last, this document essentially points to the other 2 documents, noting that, okay, this is the problem. There are some things that you might do operationally, but probably there's work to do in other areas. Next slide. So, so far, I think that, when it comes to the problem statement, the document is pretty stable. So our question as authors is whether this is something that, folks feel that we should be working on.
Jen, go ahead. Barbara. Yeah, you're both allowed to use the same mic.
I don't know, Fred. That's asking a lot. Barbara Stark, AT&T. I actually think this is a good idea. Thank you, Fernando. And thank you for putting up with all the discussion on all the lists. Boy, you've got more staying power than I do. I'd like to see it move forward.
Jen Linkova. Yeah, I agree. This is a problem. And I actually like the document in the current form when it's not going into like how we're going to change the protocol to fix this, but talks about operational problem and operational solutions. Yeah, so I thanks for writing it. Yeah, I think we shall adopt this.
Okay, so I don't see other people charging the mic. I'm going to move you to your next presentation, Fernando.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. The second presentation is about the other piece of the document, the second piece of the document, where we were trying to essentially provide recommendations to CPU routers to try to behave nicely in the event of renumbering events. Next slide. So this is a typical residential IPv6 deployment. Of course, there's a CPU router doing DHCP version 6 prefix delegation with the ISP, and is doing Slack on the local network. Next slide. So what happens in many scenarios is that for example, when the CPU router crashes and reboots, and the CPU router does the DHCP prefix delegation again, it gets a different prefix. But the thing is that if the CPU router doesn't record on stable storage the prefixes that it has been delegated before, it doesn't have the knowledge to actually try to disable or deprecate the prefix on the local network. Of course, in that case, the hosts end up with stale network configuration information, and the problem that we were discussing before, applies and is faced here. Next slide. So what this document tries to do is essentially provides recommendations to CPU routers to behave nicely in the event of renumbering events. In some of the cases, it's recommendations that are taken from protocol specs or other documents. For example, one of the things that this document says is that CPU routers must phase out like stale network configuration information. That's actually already in RFC 7084. The thing that we are adding in this document is to require the delegated prefixes to be stored on stable storage, because if they are not, essentially upon a crash and reboot event, the CPU router will not have the necessary knowledge to do that. Another thing is a requirement that the CPU router essentially implements the proper prefix delegation and Slack interface, essentially meaning that the lifetimes that are used by Slack never span past the DHCP prefix lifetime. That's a requirement in the DHCP version 6 specification already. The final one that we have in this slide is that it has been reported to us. I think it was Ted Lemon that reported this, that some boxes, when you reboot them, they send the HCP version 6 release, meaning that even if upon a reboot event, the CPU router would get the same prefix, since the CPU router did a release, then in that case, it will probably get a different prefix this time. If I remember correctly, Ted Lemon had posted other suggestions on other things that the CPU routers should probably be doing. So this is essentially like a very preliminary list of some of the things that we would expect from CPU routers. Next slide. So as before, of course, the list of recommendations that we had in the previous slide can be augmented, but I guess a more basic question is, whether it's worth doing it, and whether, for us as authors, whether folks on the working group think this is a document worth working on.
Well, and along with this, you have a document in 6-man. That's correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So Jordi, and then, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Okay. So Jordi.
Jordi Palet. Fernando, I think you are too optimistic with the recommendation that the CPE vendors should save the information in stable storage. I wish it happens, but it will not. It will not, because doing that increase a lot the price of the CPE, and this kind of CPEs typically are meant to be very, very cheap. There are many kinds of flash memories, and some of them are meant to basically be able to reflash it a few times, and after that they will fail. They will not work anymore. So asking the vendors to be able to save a prefix once per week or once per month, I don't really think it will succeed. So I rather think we should go for a different solution. And in addition to that, the problem is always that even if we finally decide to go in that direction, I am not optimistic that the people will update the CPEs. In fact, one of the problems that we are having with the IPv6 deployment is that most of the vendors don't provide new versions of firmware for the CPEs, and that's the same for the transition mechanism. So I rather think that we should look much better for a solution from the DHCP server or something like that.
I would say that I probably agree a lot with what you're saying. But while we were, discussing the topic and possible solutions, there were folks arguing, it would be nice if the CPEs were doing this. And so what we came up with is a set of, let's say, recommendations such that if you are a vendor, a CPU router vendor, and you want to behave more nicely to these events, okay, this is what you should be doing. But I probably agree with many of the comments that you made on the mic.
Hi, Fernando, firstly, thank you very much. For me, I like what's in here, and I would definitely support it proceeding. I do agree with a lot of what Jordi said about, well, people may ignore this, etc. I don't think that's a reason not to do it, particularly because once you do this and you've got that recommendation in standards, it creates a situation where guys like myself, when we go out to RFPs in the market, can say, you must comply to this. And where you don't have it in a document, I don't have that option. And that alone would say to me that this is worthwhile proceeding with. And thanks for your efforts. I would fully support this.
Thank you.
Tim Winters, UNH IOL. So, I had a question about, in your draft, you say when we've done testing for flash renumbering on CPEs, what we see for the Slack side is often they'll deprecate the address they used to have, but by only putting it in the PIO once, right? And so then the host, if they miss that packet on a lossy network, would never get it. I see in yours, you say, any prefix that was previously transmitted, it should continue to send with 0. My question was for how long? You say like any, and I think that's probably too long. You probably want to bind it to the previous valid lifetime or something. You don't want it to go on forever.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I would put some words around that because currently it says any prefix.
Okay, and that's also probably an indication that folks might also be willing to use more appropriate lifetimes, because if they keep using the lifetimes that we currently do, like prefer for a week, valid for a month, that means that in theory you should be trying to deprecate those prefixes for that much time, which obviously doesn't make any sense at all.
Jelinkova. So I think it does make sense to specify recommendations for router vendors, because obviously some of them will ignore recommendations, but still some implementers might look at them. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to publish any router requirements at all. And also it helps to, as Anna mentioned, define requirements and testing criteria. So we basically say what we shall expect from CPEs, and that requirement should be there, yeah.
Exactly. Just to clarify my point, I am not saying that we should not do that. I am saying that in addition to that, we should also approach from the other side, because I think part of the problem is the conscience that we have that we should use non-persistent prefixes. That's creating a lot of problems to us. I think we need to show the ISPs that the model that we are using for IPv4 is broken. And that's going to create probably other problems that we didn't see right now. So this is probably not the only problem of using dynamic prefixes. So probably we should provide better tools from the ISP side to also resolve the problem, so we can resolve the problem in two sides, not just one.
Well, and to that point, inserting myself in the queue, seems like the simplest approach is not to use stable storage, which dies, provably dies, but to put something in an RA that says, I have a new prefix. Whatever I may have told you before, please consider invalid. And I've thought about that for at least a minute. I don't make any great claims, but that might be an approach to consider in the case. Okay, so thank you, Fernando. Where I'm going to go, last couple of years, we found it useful, Ron and I have found it useful to poll the working group after a meeting and say, what do you think about some draft that was on the agenda? And people have often made some pretty good comments in email when they can get back to the ranch and think about things. I detect a comment about to come.
I just wanted to check something, and I may be wrong here, but does the facility not already exist to send a 0 TTL RA to force a withdrawal of what's already been out there, and then you could reissue, which would cause a new prefix? But I could be wrong on that, but I do have vague memories of it.
You can amplify, but you cannot invalidate. Because there's text in RFC 4861 that says that if you receive a valid lifetime smaller than 2 hours, you should ignore it.
Also, Fred, this is Bernie Volz. Also, you wouldn't want to use just a single bit, because it's back to the old problem of how many times you send that RA, right? So it's probably a routing advertisement sequence number or something that you want. So if that changes, it means you've got a different configuration, and the old stuff should be thrown away.
Okay, well, like I said, I thought about that for at least a minute. So, Mark?
I sort of have a bit of background on this. About 8 to 10 years ago, I was working on production V6 deployment for Internet in Australia, and was working with CPE vendors. And even though Internet went with stable prefixes, I also thought about the situation and actually wrote some RADVD options that are already there, and they're publicly available. You can't advertise a valid lifetime lower than 2 hours. So there's a anti-DOS, a denial of service protection in there. But the other thing I've realised is that I think the most effective solutions are the ones that are applied where the problem exists. And the way I see this partly is this factor of trouble getting CPE vendors to follow it. Updating all the hosts is perhaps even a bigger problem. I've also learned that sometimes education is cheaper than just more technology, and so I wonder, a lot of these ISPs, I suspect they're doing it just because they're following on from the way they've done IPv4 broadband, which is the way they've done dial-up. So I'm not, fundamentally, I'm sort of not against making things more robust in CPE or hosts, but I'm just a bit skeptical of its effectiveness because of partly what I've seen with CPE. I've got an old presentation from 2011 OSNOG about how good or bad IPv6 CPE is. I've recently heard that there's still memory leaks in CPE 10 years later. So if you want to play with some of these options, play with RADVD because they're already there. It's deprecate prefix and decrement lifetimes to address some of these things. But I'd certainly, be advocating, encouraging ISPs to adopt more stable models, just because that's sort of where the problem exists fundamentally.
By the way, essentially we're trying to tackle the problem, from different sides. So it's not that we think that the solution is only on the CPEs or only on the host, or we are essentially trying to approach the problem in different ways.
Yeah, and just a broader, well, adjusting parameters in CPE, or this in CPEs and adjusting host parameters is not quite boiling the ocean. I think the boiling the ocean option is multipath transport layer protocols, because then who cares about what IP address you use, as long as you've got one, or two, or three.
Okay.
Hello, Dmitry Shity from SFR Altis. I found your proposal about saving of configuration is very interesting, because have you tried to consider other devices except of CPEs in this case, other types of devices that could save this configuration? For example, the IoT router. For example, IoT router, it's not the device that it could be rebooted in much frequent times than CPEs. For example, if you have some IoT systems that has that includes the transportation system, or, for example, health medical measurements on the human bodies, yes, or in the hospitals, this system could be rebooted much more frequently. And in this case, I think your proposal about the saving of the configuration could be applied to this case.
Yeah, I mean, we use the term CPU router because that's the actually the this work was triggered by an ISP that was facing this problem. But yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I mean, we could make the document more general, applying to other, not just CPU routers.
Yeah. Okay. So I support the documents that you are trying to push, and that's all. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Marco?
Yeah, Marco Wagewaning. Yeah, I think as some people said, there are more long-term solutions thinkable, but if those solutions include the world should go to static addresses, I'm afraid the market is against us. People stick to what they know. There's so many dynamic addresses. You won't convince all ISPs to say oh yeah, let's just go static. I do see certain solutions in terms also on the DHCP server side, but as a quick fix, and I think I support Andrew in his statement, is I think we should move this forward, at least as an intermediate, until we've solved, for instance, like you said, the RA protocol, because that's going to take a long time. This appears to be a short-term solution for what is a real problem in the market. So let's move it forward and see what we can do in this space.
Okay, thank you. So at any rate, what I was getting at was what is going to be our work plan basically between now and IETF 107. We've got some interesting events that will consume our time in the U.S. We have Thanksgiving next week. In most parts of the world, people celebrate Christmas, and that's a week or maybe 2 weeks. In the rest of the world, they celebrate Chinese New Year's, and that gets interesting. So what I think I want to do is basically use the first 3 weeks in December and the first 3 weeks in January and send a note referencing one of these documents that we've got and asking for people's comments. And part of that will be, and Fernando, I know you're waiting for this question, do you want to adopt this as a working group draft? Fernando would really like to see his 2 documents adopted. So that's what I expect to do. It might be Ron sending the email, but that's what I expect to do as far as collecting comments and working group status on the drafts. You can be looking forward to that. And please feel free to say something when we send those notes. So with that, do we have any other business? Is there things that we should be talking about at this point?
Metro City SFR-LTs. Basically, we would like to receive some help and discussion from the group regarding the draft that we have at V6OPS. It was not in the agenda list, but if we have some time free, maybe we could present it and to see what people think about that, if it's possible, or what the room thinks.
So where are we at for time? Well, we've got, 23 minutes. I don't have it in the, I can't quickly present it from here. Do you have it on a flash drive?
Mail address one. Yeah, so.
Do you have it on a flash drive? Yes or no?
I could send it by mail.
Okay. I think that's going to take longer than we've got. So, okay. So I think we're going to adjourn. So thank you much. Bye-bye. Oh, I need the blue sheets back. Where are they? I see one. Thank you. So where is the second blue sheet? Well, people are already leaving.